So welcome everybody. I'm Donna Burr, a partner in our Melbourne Interim Executive Practice, and joined by our interim team today, Jacinta, Caroline, Lisa, Alex. Alex, welcome. Alex just joined us yesterday, a new partner in our Sydney office, testament to the growth in the interim market. We've brought on another partner. So welcome Alex, who's joining us today, Suze, Ali and Maddie. I'd like to welcome you all and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we work today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. As always, we are delighted to bring to you our webinar series and discussions on topics that are pertinent to you in your roles as clients, as executives in the market. This is our 6th for the year, and we've had them so far on a range of topics: brand you, some discussions around the HR transformation space, through to advisory boards, having the lovely Louise Brokerman on talking about that as a pillar people like to add to their portfolio of work. And really, for us, it's really about filling your toolkit. We like to give you information, inform you on trends so you can keep current and informed. And today's discussion, another example of that, on amplifying the employee value proposition in 2022. And I'm delighted to have two fabulous guests with me in conversation to give their advice, reflections, practical ideas on the topic. So a little brief intro. You know, the war for talent is not a new problem, as we know, but our recent interim survey supports popular commentary that the pandemic has certainly amplified it and put a spotlight on it. Not surprisingly, after, you know, a number of years of economic uncertainty, arguably, you know, we're still in that period, lockdowns, new working practices that have been rolled out, and dealing with all the challenges that sort of presented in between. Workers in 2022 are looking for more choice in where, how and why they work. And in response, employers are needing to rethink creatively about new work models, sourcing strategies to cast a broader net on the market to get the talent that they need, dealing with hybrid working and what that looks like for their place of employment, new policies, technology to support employees, etc., etc. But does any of this lean into creating an inspiring employee value proposition for retaining talent? And if not, what does? Well, to put this topic under the microscope, we've got Helen and Sally with us. And while you've got their bios, I am going to recap and do their introduction some justice. I'll start with Helen. Helen is a tech-focused HR executive who has worked with executives, CEOs, boards in developing and delivering the people strategy with passion, kindness, drive, and effective performance outcomes. Most recently, the Global Chief People Officer with biotech company Telix Pharmaceuticals, which is a top ASX 200 listed global company with a focus on cancer diagnostics. Helen's experience has been gained in small to large, complex, global and multinational organisations, and she's worked with many leading company brands such as Afterpay, Mars, Toyota, Coles, Newcrest Mining and Peter McCallum, just to name a few. Her purpose is to create an inspiring future by empowering and energising people. And I have no doubt she will inspire and energise you today with her thoughts and insights. So thank you, Helen, and welcome.
Thank you.
And Sally Elson is currently the head of people at MYOB, the leading business platform helping more businesses in Australia and New Zealand start, survive and succeed. Sally has over 25 years of experience in the human resources sector across Australia, Asia and the UK. She's incredibly passionate about the employee experience and has worked across several industries, including technology, mining, FMCG, agribusiness, and has deep expertise in large-scale change management. Sally is passionate about health and community and volunteers within the aged care and early childhood sectors. And we're in for a real treat with some of the insights, learnings and interesting ways that she and her colleagues at MYOB are tackling EVP. But briefly, some housekeeping and a call out to Ali, who is silent on the webinar, who's the real conductor of our webinars and brings all of these sessions together for us. Thank you, Ali. For many of our regulars, you will be vigilant on using the chat and sharing your learnings and experiences. And for those new, please take the opportunity to use the chat function to connect. And when using it, please turn your settings to all attendees and panelists. That way everybody can to see your comments and share and bounce off one another. With regards to questions, please raise them in the Q&A function, because what I will do at the end of this session will allow 20 minutes towards the end for questions directly to Sally and Helen. I will go straight to the Q&A and actually go through the questions there. It sometimes can be a bit tricky following them through the chat. So please use the chat to connect with one another. Specific questions, please pop them in the Q&A function and I'll come to those towards the end. This session, like all, will be recorded, and today's recorded webinar will be made available following the session via LinkedIn and also on our website. So we'll run for about an hour and cut to questions sort of in the last 20 minutes. That is the introduction done. So let's get started. Lots to get through today. And let's start broadly with the post-pandemic 2022 business landscape. And Sally, I might direct this one to you to start with. Can you tell us a little bit about MYOB and what you do, sort of purpose, customers, services, and share your observations on the post-COVID business landscape? I guess specifically, how has the pandemic changed the way that you do business at MYOB?
Yeah, thanks, Donna. And thanks for having me. I'd also like to recognise the traditional owners of the land that I'm coming to you from today. Thank you for having me. So in terms of MYOB, we are a business management platform, so helping more small and medium-sized organisations to do what they need to do to be successful in their business. We say most business owners go into business not because they want to do their accounts and run their the back office, but ultimately that will be what will determine their commercial success. So our products are here to help them do that, connect them up with all of the elements that are required. We are ANZ based and are helping millions of small and medium-sized businesses, and also have billions of dollars going through our payrolls each month. Are actually the largest payroll provider to Australia and New Zealand employees across the group. So have a real impact. And we know both Australia and New Zealand economies are driven by SMEs. It's actually different to some of the other countries around the world. And that's something that is really incredibly important to us in terms of how we can help them be successful. I personally find it's so, you know, my dad and my parents have run small businesses. My husband has had a business on the side. It become, you know, you recognise how important this is, and it doesn't just impact the way people feel their success in terms of their business. It's about families, it's about lives, and how that kind of goes through. So we will talk later, our EVP, it's your work matters, and we absolutely believe that our work matters and makes a massive difference in the communities that we're involved with.
Fabulous. And what have you noticed sort of, you know, coming back, whether it was through the SME market and the impact of COVID on them, but any kind of reflections on things that are done differently, any observations, be it how, you know, your employees are servicing the SME market?
Yeah, look, I mean, definitely SMEs kind of recognise the benefits of SaaS products. All of a sudden, a number of us were working from home, and SMEs were having the same issue, and to be able to continue to run their business relatively uninterrupted for a lot of them, it meant because they had a SaaS product, they were able to manage online and continue in that kind of format. So we've seen that shift. And there's a lot of research that shows those businesses that have a product and are using technology are actually more successful because they're able to ride out the bumps that come along, and that we've definitely seen through this pandemic. In terms of our own workplace, it's changed the way we've worked. But I would say we started from a really strong base. We had a really strong flex culture, and we were able to sort of step out, you know, in a day and nothing changed for a lot of us, except that feeling of community in some ways, right? It has shifted. And now that's a key kind of part of what we're trying to do as we come back to the offices and recognise what's important and what that side of things brings for us personally. And because work's more than just work, it is a lot on the mental health kind of components. And what and how we can do is much broader than just the to-do list, that's for sure.
Thank you. And we'll come back and explore some of that shortly. Helen, if I can jump to you, most recently with Telix, and you've got a broad lens of the market here and also overseas because your role is global. What are some of the biggest changes that you're seeing and hearing about in the post-pandemic workplace, and how businesses are sort of re-engaging in 2022.
And it's very different. Thanks. It's great to be here, but it's been really different in the different countries. It's definitely been a key observation. I guess, firstly, in this pandemic period, I've been in 2 different organisations that had very different sort of workforces, of course. So Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre was where I was working at the time that COVID hit. And you can imagine, being a health service, the impact was quite enormous on the workforce and the changes that needed to be undertaken. It's quite a rude shock to the system to have to make such significant change. There was a great and urgent focus on well-being of our employees, of course, particularly mental health, as well as, of course, the physical components, which are naturally required in a health service. And then also, and moving across to Telix and seeing that where it's a virtual organisation. So, a lot of the talk that we have at the moment is about a workforce that is, how do we deal with hybrid and those sorts of elements, but working at Peter Mac became very clear, 50% of the workforce is still actually on site. Yep. And that's very different from the hybrid conversation that continues to happen. So I think that's really important that we acknowledge the reality of that difference. It's almost created a divide. And in fact, I think COVID has created many divides in many different ways. In Telix, they had been working virtually, they being all over the world, they, were always online. So there wasn't much of a change to the workforce directly in place. However, in Americas, for example, people continued to go into the office and, continued to be at risk. I came at the latter end, so it was starting to reduce in its impact in the US at that time. Whereas in Australia, everything had shut down. There was obviously no travel. So as there was a lot of travel that had been happening across the organisation, it completely stopped. So we were recruiting people sight unseen, other than virtually. So we'd never met the executive team. So when I first got to Telix, I was working with the executive team for probably 4 or 5 months before I actually got to meet them. So that was
fascinating.
Pretty amazing, actually, to be in that space. But it also, to me, it slowed down the team effectiveness work that we needed to do. There's only so much you can do virtually, and I do believe we could have had some more interventions, and I'd love to talk a bit about that today, than we did have. But at the same time, not meeting someone and being able to. And I couldn't help myself. I had to hug them when I saw them. And I did ask for permission. But to be
we are human first.
To be able to see them in the flesh in March this year, and to be able to give them a hug was just fantastic. And that really did make a difference to moving forward on team effectiveness. So I guess that's a couple of the observations in the organisation. In Belgium, it was a different approach again. Main office there, there was a lot of working from home, a lot more happening in that space, but there was a workforce that needed to be on site producing some of the diagnostic kits that we needed. So that was a different way of needing to work with them. So that's probably the observation.
And look, thank you. And both of you brought up just a diversity of, I guess, challenges and opportunities in some regards of, what different workplaces are fronting into. I think, many on the call are probably in the thought working space and again, a different set of opportunities and challenges versus sort of the front line of Peter Mac, where, you're dealing. Yes, we're all dealing with the changes that are going on, but actually you're dealing with the issue of the health-related issue that was deep in the community at the time. I'd like to now kind of go a bit deeper then into, some of the, observations you've made and maybe the sort of challenges and opportunities that presented and sort of how you're seeing some of the responses, both, I guess, things that worked, but also great to hear the things that didn't work, because I know many people on the call in their workplaces, in executive roles and or, interims or executives in the search market going into workplaces, are really, really trying to, take what they're hearing and actually relate that back to their workforce, their business, their customers. Our interim survey recently suggested that, the thing that employers are doubling down on in 2022 is EVP and how they get the narrative and experience right. And it's not just the narrative, how do they actually, get that experience right. And I feel that, the stakes feel higher now than what they perhaps have in the past, given we're in a talent type market. And so specifically, many things highlighted were things that employers are focusing on around hybrid working, flexibility, culture, meaningful work, aligned values. It's a lot of headline statements, but what does all that really mean, and how do you actually translate that into something practical? So again, Sally, I'll start off with you, and then we'll flip to Helen. But does this resonate for you at MYOB? What have you observed about how the workforce, their motivations, desires might have shifted coming back in 2022? And I guess, what opportunities or challenges has that presented? And then we'll kind of lean into how you might have tackled that.
Yeah, sure. Oh, it's absolutely shifted, right? We've all got new habits and new routines that we've built around a different way of working. So the thing that we have absolutely reinvested around that sort of connection, what we call connection to purpose and connection to community. And that was something, and it does form the basis of our EVP in so many ways. And we talk about we are MYOB and what does that pillar mean? And as I said, we talk about your work matters, and that's always been something that's really strong for us, in that we know what we're doing is helping so many, and feeling that sense of purpose is extremely important. And we've felt and found that becomes more and more important for people as they've come back after 2 years of a bit of reflection on what's important to them and how they're feeling. But the part of community was something that we've said we've actually always been really good at that. We've had people always walk away going, oh, it's the people, it's what we do. And communities come in various forms. They're locational communities, they're technical or functional communities, and they, as well as communities of thought, and how we connect people around inclusion and diversity and environmental sort of things that we have going on. So there've been things that we've notice people want more of, but they're a bit different, and you have to think about how we want to, and we have done some work, and I'll talk to that later on, bringing that to life now versus how we used to do that.
Great. And Helen, curious on sort of your thoughts, this shift in employee sentiments and about why they choose to work. What are some of the things that you've seen, opportunities and challenges that's presented?
Yeah, well, I guess Telix as an organisation has only just transitioned from having sort of a product pipeline, which it continued to evolve, into commercialisation. So it was transitioning through and starting to, it's moved from startup to then being listed to now commercialisation. And so it wasn't just, the pandemic that was going on. It was a massive transition that was happening. The need for maturity of the organisation to set up fundamental infrastructure, systems, processes, people systems, people processes. What I initially could see when I first joined Telix was an observation that the culture was accidental. It was there as a result of the people that were there, the leaders and their influence, being a relatively small organisation. And the way that they behaved and the things that they believed in. And of course, the stories they told themselves about themselves, which sets up culture, doesn't it? So what the first thing that I was working on was actually the values, because I felt that we needed to really get the essence of the organisation. And in pulling together the values, it gave something to people to attach to. And then, of course, our purpose was also tweaked as well. So the Telix purpose, I mean, it's so meaningful, creating longer and better quality lives for people with cancer. It's pretty meaningful.
Packs a punch. Yep.
Yeah. So people are really passionate about being a part of the organisation. So that part of the EVP, the meaning and the purpose, is very, very strong for Telix employees. The science is also quite leading edge. So being part of biotech and being a part of a growing organisation, it also made it very attractive. But the challenge, of course, was the sense of community. And Sally, it's great that you've had that, sense of community that's always been there. I think that I could see that there needed to be more connection, but because we were adding so many people, such growth. I mean, I saw, 100. So We're now at about 250 people at Telix, 100 people recruited at least in the last year. So you can see how that shifts things. You know, it's almost doubling the organisation.
Absolutely.
And it shifts the dynamic. So having clarity of our purpose, having clarity of our values of what we stood for. And there were things like, we strive to be extraordinary, you know, which I think is just so true of the Telix culture, that it makes it very attractive for people. And I guess then the other elements of attracting people, we've certainly had to be quicker. And I think that's going to be a theme that we'll talk about a bit today.
Yes.
Recruitment can't happen the way that it used to be. We need to be speedy, and it, you know, for those that are applying for jobs, I think you need to be speedy in keeping an eye on what jobs are coming up and ensuring that you're responding really quickly, because if in being in the organisation, you need to look at candidates as you get them in. You need to filter them as you go. You can't wait 3 weeks for a shortlist and then present that. You know, it doesn't work that way. You'll lose great candidates. You'll great talent. So I think that's one thing that we've really had to make sure that we have a shift on. And even things like managers saying, oh, that person seems like they're great for the role, but I wouldn't mind seeing another couple of candidates. Well, you're going to lose that one. Well,
thank you. You're championing our cause.
Right. Test it out, you know. So that's really shifting. We also really lifted the standard of talent. You know, we really wanted to make sure every single role counts in who we were recruiting, and particularly our leaders, because we knew that our leaders would be then selecting the teams that they would be putting in place.
Yep.
And so the focus on leaders, psychometrics being included, making sure that they were that we really found the quality of talent, that was also critical. So there's a couple of things.
Yeah. Oh, fabulous, Helen. And I couldn't agree more around the speed to market in this environment, and whether it's a point in time or whether this is just now, you know, this is how we work and beyond. You know, we would always say networks are key, and networks are how things happen, and everybody's sort of, you know, sort of biggest competitor, if you like, are networks, and we know that degrees of separation are becoming less. And to your point around, you know, businesses casting that, or I guess were my words, but casting that wider net for looking at talent. So yes, who you might have ordinarily gone out of the perm market, and we would also suggest, and as our survey, that, you know, thinking of interim contractors, you know, part-time working, really thinking about, you know, how you contract a broader diversity of talent would be key. Let's now get into the nitty-gritty, the practical. I know many on the call will kind of go, look, this is all great, but, you know, what meaningfully did you do? What mistakes did you make? What path did you head down and maybe need to pivot in terms of, you know, kind of that employee value proposition, whether that be that community? How did you kind of redefine community coming back into 2022 in a virtual world where people are working hybrid? Maybe it was, you know, exploring, you know, more explicitly, you know, hybrid working. I know, Helen, you've picked up on kind of, you know, really galvanizing purpose and people really, you know, connecting to meaningful work. And I know some work, we had Josh Burson, Alec Bashinsky from Josh Burson present a few months back, and, you know, categorically, hands down, I think the meaningful work outweighed many other levers by fourfold around what really motivated people and tied people to an organisation. So, you know, maybe Sally will, you know, flip to you and then back to Helen again, but keen to hear some of the practical things, implemented initiatives, and I don't mean initiatives just kind of, you know, dropped in, but sort of how you went about really sort of working through some of these challenges.
Yeah. Excited to talk about this stuff, and because I think, as you said, that that whole meaningful work and how that connects into, call it hybrid.
Yep.
I think that was missed for a while, and everyone was like hybrid, and it's so. One of the things we did is we actually engaged Swinburne to come and help us, because we said we want a high performance organisation, and I mean that because most people love to be, you know, high performing and driving to that. And how can we set up our structures in terms of how we come together, where we come together, when we come together to make us the, to give us the best performance levers. Because for us, how we're actually structured as well, team effectiveness is critical to our success. We put people in groups, they're cross-functional groups, and that's where they come to do their work. So they have a functional home and they come together to do that. So Swinburne helped us to work through what is the most productive, and then how do we set that up. So they've had lots of really interesting research, and a couple of things are actually coming together does improve productivity. Now, there was this really good stat, I'm not probably going to get it right, but a developer to sit at home will actually write more lines of code being 100% remote, but those companies that have that have less products that are actually delivered to customers.
Fascinating.
Now, yeah. So as an individual, I might feel like I'm highly productive, right? But you're not interconnected, because the reason you can get products out the door is when that person's writing that and that person's writing that, and it comes together to form a great product. So how do we find the times that they come together, and how do we find the times that they actually work remotely or in a way that does that? So what we came up with was what we call our Flexperience mindsets. So that is around our customers matter, relationships matter, you matter, but our results matter. So those 4 things are all important when we're thinking about how we work. So then we set some guidelines in saying, so we all come together, or we come together 1 day a week. You work with your teams to work out what that 1 day is. And we actually sort of put some buffers and said between Tuesday and Thursday, because there's something nice about the vibe in the office when you've got a few more people. So work it out between Tuesday and Thursday, what works for you and what are those key stakeholders. So you're making the decision, but we're putting some guidelines around that. Because the worst thing is, right, getting up and washing your hair and actually getting dressed and getting to work and no one else is there, or sitting on calls all day. It's like, I should have just stayed at home. So we've said really need people to think about how they're working, and and all of those things matter to us. So how do you factor them all in? And it's not just I'd prefer to work at home and you prefer to work in the office. Well, actually, what works for our team? What works for our relationship? And then within that, there's also some guides to say there are certain times when it makes sense to come together, and that's sometimes about the maturity of the team that you're in. So if it's a new team, actually you do need to spend more time together. Once you've actually developed a number of those relationships, built that trust, you can do more asynchronously than what you need to be doing synchronously. So thinking through those elements, we did some surveys out to our team members. We brought in the external research to sort of come up with this, and we've then been able to share and guide it in. And ultimately we have what we call, and we have for a lot of years, but it's changed to say, what are the flex deals that we're doing?
Flex deal, I love the language around it all.
So we want teams to work together to come up with that. And, within your team, you can say, well, actually, I need to do pick up on this day, or that happens, or what do I need to change? So it works for all of us, but really thinking through the how we work and where we work as one, not as separately. And ultimately, because we want to do great work, because we want to, our work matters and what we're doing. And that's what we're all striving for. So having all of those things as seeing them very much as a together thing. They're not separate. It's not just I want to do this, therefore that's how I'll work. But there's a lot of we in what we've been working through, and we included questions in our recent engagement survey, and we had 3 questions, but overall the factor was 91% of people were supportive of our Flexperience approach. The lowest ranking, which was high 80s, was I get enough face time with my team, and at 89%. The others were it works for me and it works for my team, were like 90s. So which you've always got some loud people, and that would almost be my advice. And what I actually was chatting to our exec when we were talking a bit about this, is I said, we've got to stop listening to just the loud voices, because our teams like this. And again, going back to how so that helps with why our work matters and what we're doing and how we deliver. And then the communities become part of that. So how do we, from an employee experience perspective, and the other leaderships build in the community factors, then having that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday So we say, right, that's when we will schedule things, we bring things into offices, and part of those flex deals are understand what's happening in your location, because there's no point my team, we say Tuesday, and one of my team members is in Auckland, you know, by herself in terms of my team, one's in Sydney. Actually, I said, you work with who's in those locations as well, because there's no point being the same day. So we've really been able to bring that sense of local community, team community, you as an individual, and I think together. And it's taking the time to not just, and this, I think at the end you were going to ask, what some of the advice is, understand what works for you as an organisation or our organisation. Like we're in tech, there's a lot of, Atlassian are working from home and so-and-so saying they're only coming in 4 days a year. Well, like that's fine, but we didn't want to just follow because that's what they were doing. We wanted to understand, listen, you know, work out what fits with our purpose, what fits in terms of our employee value proposition, which was community. There is part of that that's about coming together. And we said, that's important to us. We're actually not going to let go of that. And it makes us stand out. Otherwise, you could literally close your laptop today and open a new laptop and it makes no difference in a lot of roles. So that's for us, that real hook. And it's resonated, you know, so far. We've got heaps more work to do. It's not done, but there's we're really excited about it.
Look, there's so many good things to take out of that, and I love that it's an integrated approach. This isn't just about hybrid working. This isn't just about, you know, me, you, and this sort of combat, but it's the language around, and the language is so important, isn't it, in around creating community and getting everyone behind purpose. But that very much that's sort of research based, that, you know, you've checked in with the leaders, you've engaged widely to get the solution, and you iterate it as it goes. I love this concept of flex deals. I think languaging is so important in culture, but giving people kind of that power to take the things that were working for them over this last period of time and bring that now back and working in a different way. Most importantly, you know, we're here to service customers and make, you know, money and do business. So it's got a really commercial, you know, edge to it. It's not doing this for sake. Love it. Helen, very curious to hear your kind of reflections, insights. I know you've got some great ideas and things that have worked as well.
Yeah, well, I think I won't reiterate some of the work that Sally's done, but certainly a lot of the thinking aligns. And I would encourage people to have a look or listen to Adam Grant's podcast, Work Life, which refers to the return to the office. That's one of the podcasts, one of the episodes. And that is, you know, so educational because it has some latest research on the hybrid working model, the impact it's having.
Fabulous. Thank you for sharing that.
The pros and cons to be aware of, the impact on marginalised employees and the difference that makes, being, you know, if they're working from home or working remotely as opposed to being in the office. I think that's a very important component of inclusion and belonging that needs to be considered.
Absolutely.
And just, you know, the awareness of the research, I think, is very helpful as you go in with your eyes open to what we're approaching as being a very complex situation, I think. And I mean, Sally sort of touched on that. It's what about a customer? What team are you in? What sort of work do you do? Are you mostly sort of working on your own? Is there a lot of interdependency within your team? Is there a lot of co-creation that's needed? What difference does that make to how you're working? You know, how often you might come into an office or a shared space in order to work. And I do think that there was something that I heard the other a few months ago actually about the office now is like, you know how in the old days you used to go to offsites and you used to have offsite events and you'd all go as a team and you'd do an offsite thing. For me, that's what an office is now, you know.
Yes. Yeah, that's it.
You're in your own home, your home environment doing your work, but you go and do your offsite. You know,
it's a great way of thinking about it. So true.
And I think that probably helps leaders to kind of get their heads around what you're doing and how to ensure that you're maximising the time that teams are together, physically together, and not just being in the same space, which in itself is valuable, I must say. You know, just the banter of talking across the desk and, you know, hearing a phone call and interrupting and those sorts of things. That's fantastic, and that community that creates. But also then, you know, understanding that if you're going to be in the office, well, that's when you'd have your team meeting, you know, those sorts of things, of course. And although that might go without saying, I don't know how much planning is really going into that. So one of the things that we have included is making sure that we have an anchor day that is, you know, everyone in the team is coming in for that anchor day. And that does mean that we know that on that one day, everyone's there. And for my people and culture team, we'd meet, we'd have lunch, and then we'd have lunch together, and then we'd also go into our meeting and spend the time together physically. Now, of course, that was the Australian team. I couldn't quite do that with the Belgian and the US teams. So the global sort of nature made it very difficult. And the other thing about our organisation, and this is probably one of the things that I think we didn't do well to start with, and I think it shifted, was having an appreciation for the hours that people were working. So in Australia, my day started sometimes 5, 6 a.m. I'd be doing morning calls with the Americans. I'd have my day with the Australians, and then end my day, you know, my evenings with the Belgians. Sort of sometimes midnight. It's
not sustainable. No,
no, that was it was pretty full on. But for the Americans, it was you do your full day job, and then your evening starts because the Australians are waking up. And they, you know, so they talked about going home to do the night shift, you know. So I think there was a lack of appreciation for that early on, and we really needed to make a very loud call. And so our global leadership team aligned on a pact to our employees to ensure that if that was happening, here's the sort of hours that we could expect that we would be interacting, and here's the hours that we'd expect maybe once a week, maybe once a fortnight, as opposed to every day or 4 days a week or whatever it is.
Love that.
So I think that was really important to clarify the boundaries for people, but also then understand the flexibility. We did survey on the return to work in particular. We were concerned about that in Australia, making sure that people felt safe to return, but also to understand what sort of working environment they wanted to return to. And the survey results were the majority of people really wanted to work 1 to 2 days only in the office. So we were curious to understand, you know, how that would work for them. Having said that, the policy that we ended up with was 3 days in the office, and this was big negotiation, lots of behind the scenes with the global leadership team, you know, arguing about, and we were truly arguing and debating, what do we do here? They've ended up with 3 days a week that they're wanting to sort of launch in the coming few months. And I actually do think there could be some impact on talent attraction, particularly the US. People really, and you're probably seeing it in Australia too, people are really rethinking the work they do, the way they work. If they're being forced into offices and doing that as a mandate without the control that Sally talked about, that sort of flexibility, the openness to individuals and what their needs are, then there's a real risk to the organisation that you will either lose talent or not attract talent as well. So I think that's an experiment to be tested, and that we haven't seen the outcomes of that yet.
I'd echo that. We do some sort of work with Deloitte, and I know one of their kind of post-pandemic surveys, if you like, you know, of the different levers that you could pull, sort of this flexibility, hybrid working. I think they interviewed over 3,000 people. 4 in 5 said without a doubt that hybrid working and a component of that, didn't sort of articulate the days, but was categorically. So that's, you know, that's a big call out from sort of the population community saying that this isn't going away, and it, you know, it needs to land. And yeah, I imagine sort of through this year and next, there will still be an evolution of what that looks like. And as you say, maybe to the detriment of some organisations who actually, you know, at one end maybe choosing to ignore that and absolutely appreciate its sector and company specific. So it's not one way for all. But yeah, really interesting point.
And I guess the other element is managers probably need to unlearn some things as well. I think
unlearn, yes, it's a skill.
you know, how have we managed in the past? Well, you could see a person, they were at the desk, how long were they there for, you know, what were they working on, blah, blah, blah. And that's just not the way it is now, of course. And you could also set up teams, and you could have team meetings whenever you wanted to. And, you know, you could do team effectiveness easily on site with each other and do that regularly. The check-ins, you know, all of the things that used to happen that can't necessarily be done in the virtual world with the flexibility that we have. So I do think we need to help our leaders unlearn some things, but then to learn, you know, some methods.
New ways.
And the guidelines that we developed to support this sort of shift to working in the office and the hybrid working and formalising that were really around educating leaders, particularly things like if you're setting up a new team, you will need to meet with them. At some stage, you will need to meet with them. If you really want to kickstart team effectiveness, face-to-face is a fundamental requirement to success. After that, once you've set up that infrastructure, spent some time with each other, then you can start to do that. And Sally, you were saying, I heard you say that as well. It's sort of over time, it doesn't matter as much, but in the early stages, it's really critical to ensure that that's done.
You forget how much you learn through osmosis, right? You know, and like you're saying, sitting next to people and things. And one of the big things pieces of feedback we got through COVID working from home situations was our younger, more junior team members were struggling with that learning that they used to get by just being around people and you know, coming along for the ride. All of a sudden you had to like include them in and lots more meetings and things like that. So that's why we talk about what works for my team, because we probably did have you know, as you always do, some people that are like, well, that doesn't work for me. And you're like, it's actually, you know, there's part of your role that is around developing the team around you, even if you're not the leader of the team. There's, you know, what is your role in that? And there's others that need support either at the start of their career, start of a new job. You know, what are those key stages when it becomes really important?
Yeah, I think the multi-generational piece in the workforce, you know, some challenges and opportunities really presented, be it kind of more the millennial end versus maybe more the baby boomer end, and how they interacted or didn't and sort of managed through, and ongoing, what skills do we need to learn, support. I know you both touched on mental health and wellness early on, and well-being of people, you know, fundamentally. I love, Helen, that concept of unlearning. Unlearning, you know, can be that unconscious thing that you don't actually realise that you need to do. Mindful of the time, so many ways we could go here, but I guess before we flip to questions, and please, can I ask, I know there'll be a number of questions online, could you pop them in the Q&A, and I'll make sure that I touch base on that first, and then I'll also some great commentary and sharing of ideas, podcasts and so forth through the chat, so thank you everyone contributing there. But a question to each of you before we sort of flip. You know, it'd be kind of a piece of advice that could be a learning that you've reflected on, you know, over this period. You know, what would be that piece of advice you'd give to those on the call when they are actually in a role, looking at how they sort of front into EVP and all the components of that? A parting comment almost, even though we're not going. What would you call out? Either of you.
Well, one of the things that I think is really fundamental is that every interaction counts more. And that might seem pretty fundamental and pretty simple. But if you're online, for example, and you're interacting on Zoom, how do you then do the connection and the community and the check-in and the well-being? And I think that takes a more conscious, purposeful effort. So I think the short amount of time that you get to interact if you're online, I think every interaction needs to count more. And then if you are in the office, make that count too. And that takes planning and thinking and purposeful leadership. I think that's probably the fundamental, I'd say, is that.
Yeah, love it. Really purposeful, intentional interactions. Love it. Sally?
Yeah, that's great, Helen. I think that is really important. And my thing is be authentic to what it is, like understand what is important to you as an organisation, but listen, because I think the multi-generational is important. It's, you know, I go, why don't they want to come back in? Friday night drinks were the best, right? Like, but it's different. And now Friday's the new Thursday, or Thursday's the new Friday. So it is about listening and understanding. But I think it's, and not just your own people, but to the research that is out there, because sometimes people can say this is what I want, but they don't always know what's best for them in terms of mental health support and development as well. But understand what's important and make your decisions from there, not just blanket statements of 3 days, because I think that's right. It's like, how many days do we need this connection based on the work we do and what we need? And I would say build it from that approach, because then there's more credibility in terms of what you're saying. But yeah, back to the EVP, like it's what's important to you as an organisation, your organisation specifically, and to your people, and then be authentic about that. Don't just follow others.
Love it. Thank you both. So many great insights and really sort of practical things that you're both doing and observed in your workplaces and more broadly in the business environment. I'm going to flip now to some questions, and I'll start with the first one on our Q&A there. So please, pop your questions in there. And I think we've touched on this a little bit. It's from Carolyn, one of our partners in the Sydney office. And she sort of commented with regard to EVP, have you found that there is no one size fits all? I think we might have touched on this a bit any longer. And do you need to offer targeted EVPs for different pools of talent, because these pools of talent will be enticed or attracted differently to your organisation through those propositions? Just wonder if you've got any comments on that.
I don't think internally you should be having a different EVP. I think people will dial up or invest in different elements of the EVP would be my view on that. Some people value certain things more than others. But I think it I think it's actually important to have one, and that can be multi-pronged, but in terms of these are the things that are important to us and this is how it plays out. Otherwise it's a bit more confusing and can segregate.
Yeah, I liken it to a bit of a vending machine where you can kind of, it's stock full and sort of here's kind of the boundaries and offerings, if you like, but as it relates to, I think you spoke really well around that kind of my team and what works. So how do you bring it down to that level and pull the levers at different times? And it might be different times, different things for different weeks, I guess. Yeah. Helen, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd agree on the one EVP, but what you would do is probably target different elements of it. So what do you put at the front? What do you put forward for the different employees or talent that you're looking for? And I think you also need to make sure that they're when you're attracting people, the EVP needs to be very clear about what the culture of your organisation is, but it has to be true to it. And one of the things that I was hearing from Culture Amp last week was about what's important to engagement within organisations, and the type of organisation does make a difference. So they were talking about the organisations that are declining or slowing in growth or not or there's no growth at all, is that the psychological safety is really important. Now, I don't know if I put that in an EVP, but it's pretty fundamental. And then when it came to growth organisations, it's actually about career development. So if you do have an EVP, make sure career development's part of it, but make sure you genuinely can back that up with the evidence, that you do that. And examples of that probably are going to be a good idea to promote.
It's very clear from both of you that, your approaches have very much hang on some of sort of the data or just really, reflecting and looking at the organisation, the workforce, the work that's being done and actually what makes sense. And I think, there is so much information out there, so many views and thoughts and ideas, but actually the real work is about how do you take that and really make it kind of relevant and fit for purpose for you. I'll jump to the next question from Greg, and he said he loved the comment about accidental culture. And in reality, every team has its culture, but how do you positively influence that culture and not stamp out or over destroy what could be something great to build upon with corporate rules on days per week and so forth? And so absolutely through this period, I know many organisations, the lever that they pulled was probably, you know, hard and fast policy and guidelines around you must be in the office. I know the public sector community, for instance, it's a mandate of, it was 3 days back in, I'm not quite sure where it's at the moment, but yeah, your views on that, it's I imagine fine balance to find.
Yeah, and look, so for me, it was important that teams take up the conversation and not, and look, we started with so we can fit everyone in your Monday, Tuesdays and your Wednesday, Thursday, pick one of those.
Yep.
Actually, we said we were never filling up anymore. So let's just open it up. And if we get too full, we'll deal with that. That'll be a great problem to have. So I think for us, it was not about a corporate rule. We've got some guides and some support to help people make those decisions with their teams. So I think that's, for me, that then allows the team culture to continue to come through depending on what's important. You know, one of the things in our flex deal, and I liked Helen said before, like what are understanding individuals and what are their no-go zones. Like I do pick up this day, I run because I'm training for a marathon, this is the day I'd like to do that, or what does that, or I don't actually care, I'm fine. Like personally, I'm a bit of a late starter, ping me until, you know, later and I'll respond if I'm there. It doesn't bother me. But we were very clear on, or we've helped people to sort of say, be clear about what your barrier, or like what your, and when people shouldn't, and what are the non-negotiables, and having those conversations as well to bring the me into it as well.
And some great empowering of people there. That's on them, right, to find what those sort of boundaries are and then how that can work. Helen?
Yeah, I so believe in knowing your people. It's just fundamental. What motivates them, what drives them, what are their ambitions, where they're going, what's their life like, how do they manage themselves? All of those things I think are absolutely critical to being able to then be able to sort of align the expectations with the individuals as well. But culture, to reinforce a purposeful culture really takes quite deliberate work, and it's holistic. This is where org development comes to the fore, because what you're really doing is ensuring that the structure and hierarchy, the roles that exist, reinforce the values and culture that you want to have happen, and you're conscious that when you're setting that up, that you're reinforcing the culture. It's the same in all of the people systems. Of course, it needs to be embedded in every single people system, that they are reminded all the time of what the culture is, what we aim to be, what we aspire to be, and then it's the same in manager behaviours. That's reinforced in every single day, every interaction. That's why every interaction counts so much, because if you want well-being, if you want meaning, if you want flexibility, you need people to feel a sense of control over things, and therefore there's a sense of what the manager understands is needed by their team, and therefore that their team has control, freedom within the framework that is the organisation, the culture as well. So I think reinforcing the culture, embedding it throughout the systems and the infrastructure within the organisation is what makes it very purposeful, along with leadership behaviours.
Can I just pick up that on leadership behaviours? There's been a theme through here, and my question to you both is, how has leadership had to change? How have your leaders, managers in your organisations needed to shift, unlearn behaviours, learn new behaviours, and how have you helped them do that? I think stating the obvious to say that the way people lead, coming into 2022 has remarkably changed. But yeah, just curious about your reflection on the leaders in the organisations you've worked with, and what meaningfully you needed to jump on quickly to help them, to manage, lead better. We know that all of the stuff we're talking about today, leadership so fundamentally important in leading from the front. Just curious about any sort of the challenges and opportunities there.
Yeah, look, so we've definitely been focused throughout the last couple of years in terms of what is the expectations of our leaders in these kind of spaces, and we work around the employee life cycle moments that matter and what's the expectation, and then how do we bring education, information education and capability build at those points in time. Hybrid's one, we're actually running a session in November where we're going to be doing what we call our Leader First conference around hybrid working. So how do you engage online, how do and what are some tools and tricks from that perspective. But we've had to think as an organisation, go, okay, what you used to have those kind of hallway conversations in giving more context about decisions that are made, like how do we put the forums in place to make sure we're really clear about that. So I think it goes both ways, being clear about the expectations and helping on what are new capabilities that our leaders need and providing the resources for that, but thinking from an executive and a leadership perspective as well, what are the things that need to change there to make sure that our leaders continue to feel as informed and connected then, and like broadly team members as well, but particularly those expectations and how we're flowing that through. So I think it's just been, I like that kind of term, conscious as well. And again, this is where all continuously kind of moving through this and learning every day a little more things we have to do and things we have to do a little bit differently. So I think it's just continuing to listen as well to what people are saying, what's working, what's not.
Helen, what are your thoughts around that?
Well, one of the aspects that we've responded to in our engagement survey is looking at the inconsistencies when it came to measures of leaders. It was like an 80% span. From 20% to 100% satisfaction with the manager. And so that really enables us to target the leaders that that scored lower, that had particular issues, that we needed to look at them and their style and their approach and be able to work with them individually. So I think sometimes we do a one size fits all for leaders, and I think that's good for new capability building and certain aspects and cultural reinforcement, but there are also sort of targeted development that's needed. So that's probably a key there. And the second thing I would say is that I brought this book, Think Again, Adam Grant. I must love the guy. I've talked about it twice now, but Think Again is probably the book that I would love leaders to have a look at, because it helps you individually to be able to think again. We change our kitchen more often than we change our ideas.
So true.
We form a concept 20 years ago based on
hold it tightly.
Years ago organisation, and that doesn't mean it's the same today. So I think that's one, and it also then helps leaders to understand how to influence others to think again. So I'd emphasise that's one thing I would have loved to have introduced. I didn't quite get to that point.
I love it. I think we're close to the top of the hour. There's been some great chat going on, some great kind of summarising of the key points. Thank you to my colleague Jacinta Whelan, who's always on to sort of summarising the points. So what we will do is we'll share the transcript of the chat too, some great insights, links to various websites and books. And I know, Helen, you're an avid reader and podcast listener, so we'll make sure we send through the details of what you've cited today as well. So thank you. Thank you both. I can't thank you enough. I feel like we could speak for another hour and hear a whole lot more about your thoughts and reflections, but really, really thankful for the time you've shared with us this morning, the great insights. Everybody on the webinar and those who registered, we will send through a copy of this straight up. We'll also be available on LinkedIn. We'll send the details of the chat. Feel free to reach out. We will share the LinkedIn connections for Helen and Sally as well. Feel free to connect with them. They're both happy for you to do so. And thank you. I welcome further connections and discussions on the topic, and I hope everyone has a great day, and we look forward to you joining us at our next webinar. Thank you, Helen and Sally. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Bye all. Have a great day. Thanks, Donna. See ya.
Take care, everyone.